All right, so here we are in the garage, and behind me we have the '69 Mercedes W108, which is going to feature on the channel in future. That's going to be the pièce de résistance. It is going to be the project that is perfect, and then it's going to be my daily driver, so I'm not going to ruin it probably. But that's for future when I've got a workshop with plenty of room, and I can take my time and really enjoy it. So in front of us we have the equipment that we're going to be using to make this panel, and I'm going to try and do it in a manner where people can understand that you don't need a lot of fancy technology and equipment. You just need time, practice to get them skills up, and patience in a lot of cases, something which sometimes I do lacking. So we have our template. We've also got a sheet of 1.2mm carbon steel. It's not ideal. I'd have liked 1mm because it would have been a lot easier to form, but it's the best size of sheet metal, as in overall dimensions wise, that I can lay my hands on. So we're going to have to make all this out of 1.2mm, but we'll live. It'll just take a bit more effort to form. We've got an angle grinder, which we're going to use to cut out the general shape. We've got a vise with some different types of metal forming dollies. That one I just made out of a bit of flat bar and 12mm round bar. That's just going to give us a rounded edge. And then that one, which I borrowed from work, which will give us a nice radius to form our corners. And then we've got our Jenny. Now, in America, in the USA, Jennies are called bead rollers. Quite a few people call them bead rollers in the UK now as well. But because I'm old school, I'm going to keep calling it a Jenny. So this is Jenny. And then we've got various different dies to go on the Jenny for different shape profiles and stuff like that. Now, earlier on in the video, I did mention that I didn't have the tooling that I would like to form the tanking. So I'd like a tanking die to go on my Jenny, but at the moment I just don't have the finances to be able to buy one. They're about 80 quid, and it's January after Christmas, and I've got private dental bills to pay, so that's kind of made me bankrupt, so I'm having to do all this on a budget. So anyway, let's get cracked on. We're going to use a scribe just to mark out our overall shape, ready for cutting out. Let's crack on. So we've got our sheet metal with our template on top of it, and we just banged the edges, the two square edges of our template onto the edge of our sheet metal. Now, normally I like to use magnets, generally magnets on the back of a speaker, to hold this in place, but since I've moved house, I can't actually find where they are. So I'm going to use a tin of paint just to hold it down in place. And then we get our scribe, and we just draw around it. Now, if you wanted, you could use some engineer's blue, or you can use a marker pen, just like a black marker pen, just to highlight this area and then scribe over that, and that'll define your scribe mark a lot better. But I'm not overly fussed, so I'll just crack on and mark this out. So I don't know if you guys can see my scribe marks, but it's basically just scratched the surface. You can just see the radius there on the corner. And again there, you see the outline. So now I just use a cutting disc and cut along there. Now I could use a plasma cutter, but for two reasons. Number one, like I said earlier on, I'd like to show it in a manner that suggests that you don't need all the fancy tools. And number two, I just can't bother connecting up the plasma cutter. So let's crack on, cut this out. Cut a lump of it out with the tin snips, a bit quieter, keep the neighbours happy. Because we use the cutting disc, we've got a few burrs, and the practice that I use that is frowned upon is you get the cutting disc and run that and I run my cutting disc along the edge of the sheet metal, and that just deburrs it for us. Now that is frowned upon because in theory the cutting disc could shatter, but I've never had it happen, so do so at your own risk. Da-da-da! Like a freaking glove. Nice. That's pretty cool, actually. Even though I do say so myself. Very cool. Alright, smashing. Next hole. Alright, so we've got our 2 holes cut out. Now, all I did, slitting disc to cut the straights, slitting disc at an angle to cut from straight to straight, and then I used the flat disc just to follow the radius around and blend it in, basically. Now, I don't know if you were able to see on the footage, but what I did is to start my plunge cuts, I used a smaller disc and then moved up to the bigger disc. And the reason is it's a lot easier to get a smaller disc to plunge through than it is a bigger disc. So it's always handy just to keep those smaller discs lying around. So we've got our job laid flat on the ground, and next thing what we're going to do is we're going to produce what's called a joggled edge. And what the joggled edge will do is it'll do 2 things for us. It'll minimize distortion while we're forming the panel. It'll help reinforce it and strengthen it. And it'll look quite smart where it's going in the car. So I'll show you how to mark that out and then how to form that. So I've got dogleg dividers. I'm going to set them to 12mm. I'm going to go, which is slightly bigger, if you remember, than our seal flange on our window. About 2mm bigger. And then we're going to use these as like dogleg dividers, which I did used to have, but I don't know where they've gone. So we're just going to follow it around, keeping our dividers adjacent to the panel so that we keep a consistent 12mm line all the way around. So our mark there. Now what we've got to do is we've got to take it over to the Jenny and change the dies out for suitable dies. So we're over at our Jenny. We're going to use some joggling dies or some flanging dies. And we're going to offset our sheet metal by roughly its material thickness, so about 1.2mm. So this is the die. So I've heard these called different things. I've heard them called stepping dies, joggling dies. I tend to call them a joggling die because it produces a joggled edge. These are held on with Allen keys on this one. This is a WNS bead roller, or Jenny, if I remember rightly. And it has had a hard life. I've I think it's rated at 1.2mm carbon steel, but I've actually formed 3mm aluminium with this before, so it's certainly passed the test of time. And then I need to consider which way I'm going to put my dies, because if I put them one way or the other, it's going to throw me off. So I want that dropping down, so I'm going to put them like this. Lovely. You can see our scribe mark around it. So the scribe mark, we're going to line that up with this point on the roll, on the bead roller, which is joggled edge. And it's quite simple to use. We wind this all the way down. That's all the way down there. And then we count 1, 2, 3. So I always recommend, if I'm looking at buying a bead roller, I tend to buy one that has this type of handle rather than a handle that goes both directions, because it's easy to count how many rotations you've done. And then we put our work in. And we wind it down 3 turns. 1, 2, and 3. Now this is a manual bead roller, which takes a bit of effort to operate, because especially when you've got a sheet this size, it's hard to crank the handle and keep it in line. So sometimes you end up with a bit of a wavy line. It helps if you have a friend operate the bead roller, but it does take a bit of needs to be somebody you work well with and you have good communication skills with. I'm being a bit of a daft apeth here. I am juggling this the wrong way. Back out. 1, 2, 3. Start again. 1, 2, 3. So this might cause a bit of an issue down here. I don't know if you can see that on camera. No, you can't. Where I just bead rolled it the wrong way, where I just jennied it the wrong way, might cause us a bit of issue. So we might just have to plenish that down flat again at some point, just to make it look better, and then reform it. And straight away, I've got something in my way. Unbelievable. We're going to switch our dies around, because I put them in the wrong way. It's causing me issues. So 1, 2, 3. It's the issue when you're working in such cramped space. Where are we? Oh, that way. I don't know if you can see that. It's not going to come out as well as I was hoping it would, because I'm working in such cramped conditions. I've got you can't see it, but I've got, in fact, you can just see the edge of it there. I've got the tube bender there. So, but it's come out all right. Just this front corner, I'm not very happy about. The flange edge is a little bit bigger than the rest of it. But I think once it's on the car, I don't think you'd notice, to be honest. I could, and I might do actually. I could just take a plenishing hammer to that, flatten it back out, and redo it again, just to make myself feel a bit better. Issue is I don't have the space to flatten it out. But anyway, such is life. Right. Get that in the car and go test fit, and then I'll be back. Right, and we're back. So, well, I haven't been videoing. I've been cutting out some more pieces. So this is the male part to our jerry can holder, which is just going, hey presto, like that, just like a jigsaw piece fits in there, lovely. And that's going to sink back to roughly about there, like that. And then we've actually got a bit of metal that's going to wrap around that. And I'd love to say that I got all complicated with my maths for this, but all I did was I got my jerry can, measured roughly where I wanted it to be, which turned out to be 65, I think, off the top of my head. Yes, 65 millimeters. And then what I did is I made a mark on my male counterpart. See if you can see that. I've just put a scribe mark, little arrow, to mark the center point, or roughly the center point. And I put that on the edge of my big sheet of metal and literally rolled that along until my arrow pointed flat down, and then I scribed, and that gave me my length. You could get all carried away with all sorts of maths and stuff like that, but I have absolutely no interest in doing that at the moment. Maybe in future we can get all complicated like that if we're doing something very precise. So that's them two. And then I did the same for the little toolbox. To work out my depth for the toolbox, I just eyeballed it and I went with 120. And then there's going to be 10 millimeters deducted off that because we're going to put a flanged edge on it to spot weld it to this part here. So that'll give us a toolbox of about 110 millimeters deep. So that's that. And then again for the toolbox, this doesn't fit like a jigsaw piece. It's actually a bit taller and a bit wider, because then the actual internal of the toolbox is going to be below the bottom lip on our opening, just to stop bits falling out when I open the door. And it's a little bit wider again because we've got that flanged edge. We're going to flange our wall inwards, and then that'll give us a good thick bit of material for our seal to knock over. So this is actually 10 millimeters wider because we're going to have a 10 mil flange coming in on the sides of our toolbox. So let's get on with forming our pressings. So we could get all fancy with our pressings and put something like a jerry can pressing like this. I'm going to go really simple, and I'm just going to put an X across. And all that'll do is it'll just stop any jerry canning or vibration. So jerry canning in sheet metal is, so I've got a bit of jerry canning on the roof of the ladder at the moment, which I've got to take out. And that's where it's like, it's almost stretched the metal. And what will happen is if you give it a slight tap, it'll bounce one way. And if you give it a tap on the other side, it'll bounce the other way. And as you're going down the road, what that'll do is that'll go, and it'll really annoy you. So if we put a couple of beads across here in the shape of an X, that'll reinforce that and it'll stop that from happening. It'll give it a spine, basically. And I'm not going to get carried away. I could get carried away and work out where my actual corners are, but I'm just going to eyeball it. I'm using these fluorescent chalk markers, liquid chalk markers. These are water-based, so what happens is when I've done my bead rolling, I can take it and just wash it all off with some soapy water. And then I'm gonna allow for a 30 millimeter radius in the center. Now we'll go with a 20mm radius. So that's how I'm marking out for our pressing. And then I'm going to repeat the same on the jerry can. So what I've got to be aware of on this one in particular is to make sure that I put my pressings so that the actual bead, so we're putting, let's go with that one. We're putting that shape profile into our material. And I need to make sure that presses down so that our jerry can isn't rubbing against a convex profile, because eventually that'll wear through. So if we have a concave profile, it won't wear through. It won't have that high point to wear out. So when it comes to dividers, the best way of making them easy to use is to make sure they're sharp. Ensure they're sharp, and they'll work better than a compass in a lot of cases. A compass on paper. So good sharp dividers is so important to make life easier. There we have it. Our two pieces marked out. Got our radius in the middle, and what that does is if we crossed our radius over, crossed over there and there, we'd end up with a really bad pressing in our center, because I don't have, you can get a polyurethane die that would eliminate that issue, but I don't own a polyurethane die, so I just have to mark that radius just to make sure I don't roll over into the other bead that's going to cross over. So we're over at the bead roller, and I've just highlighted where I need to stop, and I've also measured 15mm in from our end as well for us to stop, and that'll stop me from actually rolling into this here, because we're going to actually put a rounded edge, a tanked edge on this edge as well. So we're going to wind up 3 turns. 1, 2, 3. No, we'll go 4, 4. And then down 4 again. 1, 2, 3, 4. And wind it up 4 again. So you can actually adjust these dies, so it'll give you like a really weird offset bead. I have done that before. Sometimes it looks right when that happens. So this isn't technically an adjustable bead roller. So you can have bead rollers that you can really quickly offset the dies one way or the other. But what I do is I actually adjust it down at the other end. And it's a bit of a slow process adjusting it. So that's one of the reasons why I very rarely do it. But then it's good for if you're using a joggling die, because you can change how much of an angle is on that joggled edge. You can make it so it gradually joggles it rather than really steeply joggles it. So I don't know if we're going to get this on camera for you. Definitely not from this angle anyway, because Jenny's in the way. But we've actually got a bit of what's called canning, oil canning. Let's just change this. Bit of what's called oil canning. And I don't know if we can get this on camera, but it has actually domed the panel like so, and that's because we were actually stretching the material. This material here is now stretched. We can counteract that by, so we've bead rolled from this side. What you could do is you could transfer these marks that we've done over onto the other side and slightly bead roll here first, and then spin it back over and do your actual bead roll on this side. your actual pressing on this side. And what that does is it presets the stretch, so you don't get that canning. Now, I'm not too bothered about it because I actually like the fact that it's going to have a hollow in this panel, because it'll give my jerry can somewhere to nestle into. There we go. That's all pressed out. Job's a good one. So what you could do if you wanted, you could get a spanner, and where this hasn't quite blended in, I can't remember what size bead this is. It looks like maybe a 10 mil. So you could get a 10 mil spanner, and you can actually put the head of the spanner on there and hit it with a hammer, and that'll bring that down flush, give you a nice rounded profile. We might actually do that. I'll show you how that happens. So I'm just going to do the other panel. I won't video it because it is exactly the same process. So I've got both panels pressed out, and it actually turned out to be a 12mm bead. So all I do is I get the open end of my spanner, lay it on the end of the bead that I've rolled, tap it down, and it produces a much better finish. Actually looks like a good pressing. We do that on all our ends, every single end of every single bead. There you have it. All of a sudden, it's just got a nice rounded end on it, rather than it just being a weird tapered out thing. So next, what we've got to do is we've got to work out how much material we need to allow for our tanked edges or tanked corners. And we know that our round bar is 12mm that we're going to use to form these tanked edges. But when we're working with sheet metal, what we've got to do is we've got to work to what's called the neutral line, which off the top of my head is about 0.42. But on thin stuff, what we do is we just allow 50%. So our material thickness is 1.2. But because I'm not being that fancy, I'm going to go with 1mm. And then 50% of that would be 0.5. But because we're working so far, we're working on a full circle, that would actually be 1mm. So we need to add that to our 12mm round bar, because that would be our neutral line. Because when we're working with sheet metal, we shrink, stretch, and cut to form it. So our actual dimension would be 13mm. Now you could actually probably just get away with doing 12mm, but I'm just being fancy. So our 13mm round bar. Then what we do is we take that 13mm and we're going to have to work out our circumference of our circle. So we take 13 and multiply it by pi, which is 3.14. Still in the camera? Yeah, 3.14. I've got to get the calculator now and figure that out. So that equals 40.82. Again, we're not going to get too fancy. Or we're just going to get rid of that so that it comes to 40. So our total is 40, but we're only bending to 90 degrees, okay, which would be 25%. But we're going to do this in two halves, so that would be 90, and then we're actually going to form each half of our joint up to 45 degrees, and then we'll weld at this point here. So 360, sorry, divided by 45 is equals 8. So we take our 40, we divide that by 8, which gives us 5. So when we mark in on our sheet metal how much radius, how much needs to be radiused, we know that it's actually going to be 5mm that we need to mark in from our edge. And that gives us a good guide for how much of that material needs to have a radius on it. So our next step now is to produce our rounded corners, our tanked edges. And like I said previously, metal forming is all about shrinking, stretching, and cutting. So every time we do something to metal, we either shrink or stretch it. So when we put these beads in, press these beads in, that stretched the material. So it's actually thinned it and stretched it. Best way is to imagine plasticine. So when you're working with Play-Doh or something like that, and you stretch it, it thins that Play-Doh. Play-Doh's a very good analogy with metalwork. And then obviously if you stretch it too far, what it does is it snaps, it shears. So the same applies to metal. So we're going to put a rolled edge all the way around this. But when we get to our corners, what's going to happen is on our, how do I describe this? On our external radius, outer radius, our material, as we roll that edge over, is going to shrink. So what's going to happen is it's all going to cluster up, and it's actually going to close in like that. So that would be straight, and then as we round those edges, it's going to cluster up like so. And then on the internal radiuses, what would happen is the material would then stretch out. So if it was straight and we wanted it to bow out, it would do that. It would actually expand. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to, it's very difficult. It's easy to make materials stretch. It's very difficult to make it shrink. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a shrinker now on these outside corners and just pre-shrink it, which will allow us to form those rounded edges a lot easier. So these are called shrinker stretchers. This one here is a stretcher. This one here is a shrinker. These are by Metz, this brand. I've not really had any issues with them. I would say, though, that the tooling doesn't seem to have lasted as long as I would like it to. But that might be because typical MetalByBrian style, I tend to give stuff a bit too much grief, a bit too much hard work. So I tend to find that with this tooling, it doesn't like shrinking anything more than 10 millimeters from an edge. It takes a lot of work if you have to put it all the way into that throat there. So they're quite simple. You got a lever, you press down on a lever, and it pushes the tooling down, and then they've got like V-shaped blocks inside that actually squeeze the two jaws together and gather all the material into a tighter area. One thing you should never do with a shrinker stretcher is if there's no material between the two jaws, you should never press down on the lever because you'll actually knacker up the tooling inside. You'll make it blunt, basically, so it won't grip the metal and pull it together. So what we do is we get our sheet metal and we put it in our jaws and we start working it around. I don't know if you'll be able to see that on camera, but it is actually starting to roll it around already. We just have to give it a bit of manipulation because we want it to roll it that way. If we don't, what it might do is it might pull it up instead of down. So we just have to push down a little bit on the panel to make sure it does actually go in the direction we want it to. Then we do that on all other corners. All right, so we've got our panel shrinked and stretched. You will get some surface marring like that. All right, that's just the jaws gripping onto it. That's to be perfectly expected. But you can see, see if we can, don't know if you can see that, but it has started to pull that corner around. So now what I'm going to do is on both sides, I've got my dividers set to 5 millimeters, and I'm going to scribe down both sides, down all the way around the perimeter on both sides. And that's going to give us our guide for when we start tanking our edge. Right, so we've got our 5 millimeter perimeter marked all the way around our sheet metal on both sides. And then we've got our dolly. And in this case, dolly is a fancy word for a bit of round bar welded to some flat bar. And then I've just rounded the ends off to stop any surface marring. In this case, that's 12 millimeter round bar. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our line as a bit of a reference so that we can sort of eyeball where it needs to be clamped on so that we can form that radius around the perimeter. So we're here at the vise. We've got our bit of round bar, our round over stake in the vise, just clamped in. And then all we're going to do is, with our plenishing hammer, we are going to put our straight edge along here, and we're just going to eyeball where this line looks like it goes off the tangent, which is the edge of the circle. And then we're just going to tap it. Now I have a light, and it's actually perfectly situated just here. If we point straight up, and then what that's going to do is that's going to shine the light, and it's going to allow us to see when our radius meets this line that we've got scribed in. So if you have a light that you can position sort of behind where you're working, it really does work perfectly. So literally, plenishing hammer, and just gradually tap. Some people would use a leather hide mallet for this. You can use whatever you prefer. I just always find it's a bit more successful with the plenishing hammer. The reason some people use a leather hide mallet is, in theory, if you get carried away with this, you end up stretching the material. So you got to have quite a good ear to be able to hear, because you'll be able to hear when you start stretching it. It'll make a different tone because you're actually bottoming out onto the material. So you just got to be able to hear when you start stretching that material. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but I can actually see the difference in light where my line is. So I'm actually working so that the light is brighter on this side of the line than this side of the line. So all I'm doing at the moment really is just making sure I'm forming a straight line, and then afterwards I'll start working the radius. You'll notice as well is when I'm using my plenishing hammer, I'm doing this motion. I'm actually pulling the metal in that direction. Not hard taps, fast, gentle taps, rapid, gentle taps. There you have it. We've got the start of our panel radius, our corner radius. So once we get to the corners, we've done most of the work by shrinking it. If we didn't shrink it, this would be quite difficult, this next stage. We're going to use this rounded end on our round bar, and just use that to form our corner. And then back onto a straight again. So we're not going to get too carried away with our corners yet. We're going to do them a little bit, but then focus on our straights, and we can finesse our corners at the end. A well-situated light. I cannot emphasize enough how useful a well-situated light is in this situation. So I cocked up a little bit so I can put it on the flat anvil on this vise. Just tap it down. And there we have it. One panel ready to put in the car. And that's taken me 15 minutes with my little explanations. 15 minutes to form that edge. Not that bad. Be a lot quicker if we had the actual die for the Jenny, but didn't take long at all. So the next thing we've got to form is we've got to form the panel that will come into the car, essentially. So I've got my strip of 65mm, and I've actually put, hopefully you guys can see this, I've actually put a mark just there. I'll put the light on, shall I? Don't know if that's made any difference, but anyway. I've put a mark there, and that's going to be where my welded joint's going to be, because obviously we're going to have to weld this somewhere. So put that mark there. Then all I'm going to do is I'm going to mark where my first radius starts, which is right here. So I've got my mark there. We'll transfer that to the other side. And then I take a square. Doesn't have to be a fancy engineer's square or anything like that. Just be a combination square for what we're doing right now. And I put that all the way across that mark. And all that does is that just provides us with a visual reference to ensure that when we form this radius onto our bit of sheet metal, we keep our work square. And then I've had a look around at what is about the closest radius to that one that we've just marked up, and it is, looking at it, this bit of round bar on my bead roller here. So I'm literally just going to get my sheet metal, put it in there, and then wait until my purple line, my square line that I've just marked, meets the tangent of the round bar. And the tangent is the edge. So literally, just as my purple line disappears, because it's met that tangent, I'm just going to pull it around nice and squarely. Looking at it, it's just under 90 degrees. And that's our first bend. And then we'll repeat the process over and over again, till eventually we've got a complete circle. There we have it. Looking somewhat like, not bad that at all. So now it's just a case of TIG welding that up. We'll flap it down, give it a bit of a plenish afterwards just to remove any tension from the joint, and then form it just like we did with our back panel. So we've got our joint welded up. All I did is I did what's called an autogenous weld. So I didn't use any filler wire. Literally just got the tungsten, put it at the joint, and ran over it. Then what I did is I put it on the anvil on the vise, and I just plenished it with a plenishing hammer. And what that does is it, number one, it flattens it. If we've got any convex profile or concave, it'll smooth that out. But it also relieves any tension in the joint, which will make it a lot easier to form for us, and it'll also stop cracking in future. Autogenous welds, so welding without filler rod, is generally frowned upon. But because this isn't a structural panel, I was perfectly happy to do that. Now, if I was doing a full panel replacement or a repair on a part of the car where it was part of the structure, then I would definitely use filler rod or filler wire for that joint. So my next stage now is to create that tanked edge on this panel, and all I've done is I've just marked out and in, because if I cock this up and get it the wrong way around, it's going to cause an absolute nightmare for me. I'm going to have to remake the whole thing. So this will be tanked outwards, and that will be tanked inwards. I'm not going to get it on video tanking this, because you'll just be bored, because it's the same principle as what I've been doing already. All right, so I've tanked both edges, outside radius, internal radius. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tack the back side to here. It'll take a little bit of muscling and manipulating, because as we've hammered formed this, it will have changed shape slightly, but we can push all that back into shape as time goes on. And then I'm also going to tank the main panel and then tack it on there as well. And there it is. I am a happy chap. I think that's very cool. I like it a lot. I don't know really how I'd make that so that it was any better, really. Jerry can fits like a glove. We'll get some rubber pads in there just to stop it rattling, and then that sits in there. Jerry can will go red, because red means danger. And then we're going to make a stainless steel strap that will have a pivot here, and then go onto an over center latch here to clamp it in place. And then our toolbox, which we'll be making in our next video, and then that'll hinge here, and the hinges will be underneath the door, so it'll all be hidden, and then it'll latch at the top and pivot down to form a bit of a shelf. And then I think we'll have little straps holding stuff like spanner rolls and stuff in there. The only way I could have improved the overall quality of the fabrication, I think, would have been to have the right dies for the Jenny. Because I've had to hammer form this, I can feel it under my fingers. There's ripples and dents and dings and bangs. Now I can smooth a lot of that out with the plenishing hammer, but I won't be able to get it all out because I don't have all the time in the world. So I think what I'm going to have to do is, I think this panel, if I can say I think another time, this panel will be going either matte black or matte grey, which I think will contrast nicely with the yellow. And I reckon I'll probably end up bonding this panel in with some PU sealant or something along those lines. But I think that is really cool. Just needs a little bit trimming off there, looking at it. A little bit of material and it'll sink back a lot better. But that's it for this one. Like I say, in the next video, we'll be making a little toolbox. If you like what you're watching, please like, share, comment, and if you haven't already, subscribe. It's very much appreciated. Till the next one, cheers for now.